I guess to start us off, the thing I try to keep in mind during every holiday season, as there is so much going on in terms of advertising and promotion and television specials and so forth, that wants everything to say this is, quote, as the song says, the most wonderful time of the year. Well, perhaps for some and definitely not for others. And so that's where, to me, it's always important, perhaps from 6 years of Catholic grade school, learning from the nuns, to always have compassion for the poor and to understand that there are people during this holiday season who don't have a home, who won't be celebrating Christmas in any way whatsoever because they simply don't have the resources to do so. Things are so oriented to money and family during the holidays that if you don't have money and you don't have family, how do you even celebrate the holidays at all? And so to answer that, I composed a song a number of years ago and recorded it on one of my albums, and I'd like to share that with you now. How shall we have Christmas? The mother asked her son. There's no money left to buy a tree, nor presents for anyone. Though we've worked so hard, it seems that it's all gone when day is done. So how shall we have Christmas? The mother asked her son. How shall we have Christmas? The question seems so odd. If my parents aren't religious and don't even believe in God, or the baby in the manger where kings and shepherds trod, how shall we have Christmas if we don't even believe in God? How shall I have Christmas when my family is dead and gone, and I have no one with whom to be? What do I celebrate alone? With shorter days and longer nights and nowhere to call home, how shall I have Christmas when my family is dead and gone? I shall find in Christmas a day to live in love, to be aware of what's around me, within and up above. A day to let the old be gone and look for the new to come. I shall find in Christmas a day to live in love. At one time in the long past, I was told that during this time of the year, there are actually 13 different celebrations, depending on which religion or belief system you're referring to. More recently, I heard that the count is now up to 25. Basically, everyone has a celebration at this time of year because it's when everything shifts. And for the Northern Hemisphere, the days finally start getting longer again. And in times of antiquity, that would be where people would see longer nights and shorter days and colder and colder and colder, to wonder if anything was ever going to get warm again, because in some parts of the world winter seems so long, and you wonder if spring will ever return, and will the sun come back, or are we facing the end of the world? And so that pivotal moment when the days started getting longer was this burst of hope that it wasn't a downward spiral that would never end. More and more I focus on I guess what you would call the winter solstice. But of course, in Australia, the winter solstice would be what our summer solstice would be. And so if we're looking at creating global community within humanity, there has to be some recognition of how we're always at opposite ends of this turning and this shifting. And as my neo-pagan friends say, the turning of the wheel, the turning of the year. And so there's some hope coming back into this, that even if we don't have the religion, the family, or the money, that somehow this can still be the turning of the year, sometime where we say good things will come again, and the cold won't last forever. An endless winter would be problematic. An endless season of difficulty would be problematic. And yet I try to remind myself in those times where there isn't enough money and there isn't any resource, and I wonder if anything I do matters, or if something were to happen to me, how long would it be before anybody found me? Because for all essential purposes, except for my dogs, I have no family. And at the moment, I have no home. And so I'm trying to make the best use I can of whatever resources become available to me. But it is a daily struggle to convince myself that all the ways that I'm ignored and neglected and so forth, that somehow it is important, it is essential to keep going, because I get emails and letters from people occasionally who tell me how what I share through these shows means so much to them, and that something about knowing just that I'm here is an inspiration. And I feel like a fairly ordinary person. Perhaps I'm not, but I don't think of myself as all that special, I guess. But there's something about me living my life openly where everybody can see it that seems to somehow be instructive or inspirational to others. And so when I get these letters from people saying, please don't ever stop, and thank you so much for creating this, and thank you so much for presenting or discussing this or that topic, and I kind of shrug and say, well, thank you, and I guess I should keep going. But there have been a lot of times where I commented to friends that I think the reason I wound up being Sister Who is because the world wouldn't let me be anything else. But it keeps me alive, and as long as I'm alive, doing these shows is not so much about all my difficulties. In a sense, I want to be honest about those. I don't want to lie, but that's not the measure of who I am. And that's where I sometimes try to remind people that we don't want to be only a reflection of what's done to us. We want to show the world what kind of people we are. Am I just a reflection of every bad thing, every injustice that anyone's ever done to me, every time they rejected me, closed the door in my face, refused to have anything to do with me? I had guests, very intelligent people, who said they didn't want to be on my show because they were afraid it might reflect badly on them. I guess because I'm different, sometimes controversial. I don't think controversy is anything to be afraid of, as long as one is willing to discuss it and have a dialogue about it, because there's always something to learn. And in the Word, Christmas started with Christianity, but of course everyone decided a long time ago that Jesus was actually probably born in the summer. But the holiday was moved by some early church leadership to where it is because it's close to the winter solstice, but they wanted to pick a specific date. Christmas is such a convergence of so many different traditions that I don't think it's really legitimate to say who owns it. We don't need to be a reflection of somebody else's beliefs or religiosity or ecclesiastical decisions or whatever. We can take any holiday that the calendar gives us and celebrate it in our own way with our own decorations, put whatever is meaningful to us on that tree, and take this turning of the year, this auspicious pivot point in the year's time between dark and light. But it seems not a big stretch to say that this is a time for pausing, for familial love and remembering and giving to those in need, remembering to show the world what kind of people we are and not just be the effect of somebody else's selfishness or greed or whatever, or advertising campaign, but to find a meaning and a purpose in the turning of the year, in this time of pausing to remember, who am I? And if I had a bare tree in front of me and somebody said, decorate it to represent yourself, what would you put on it? How do you illustrate your values? How do you illustrate the fantastic moments of your life? Would you have ornaments that all have photographs in them? Or any number of auspicious moments in your life, times that made you stop and go, wow. So many things are moving so fast. And you ask any elderly person and they will tell you that life goes by way too fast. But we come to Christmas and, Valentine's Day is kind of the day for romantic love. But Christmas seems to be, that turning of the year, that communal hope for spring to return, for the days to start getting longer again, for the nights to stop growing and the cold to stop increasing and start this journey back toward the warmth and rebirth and renewal of spring. And we still have a lot of winter ahead of us. It's true, but somehow as the days keep getting longer, it doesn't feel like we're going down. It doesn't feel like we're being defeated. It feels like there's a struggle, we will deal with the struggle, and we will get past the struggle. In Christmas time, everybody gets to experience the holidays however they experience them. And just because somebody has one experience doesn't mean yours is the same or ever will be the same. The opportunity, the invitation in every Christmas is to take that season, to take that bare tree and decorate it in a way that expresses yourself, in a way that expresses what you value, in a way that expresses what you value within your community. You could just as well have a Christmas tree that's decorated with the photos of everyone you love, all of your pets, living and deceased, all of your family members and relatives, living and deceased. And if you're estranged from your family like I am, then all of the symbols and meanings that are important to you, how important it is to love, to seek peace, to find a happiness that is not at someone else's expense, to find a happiness that is not based on denial, to, maybe what you have on your Christmas tree, or what you could have on your Christmas tree, would be pictures of major pivotal accomplishments in human history. A picture of a civil rights march, a picture of the people dancing on top of the Berlin Wall when the division between East and West Germany was removed and it became one unified country again. Any sort of moment that gave people hope, that reminded us that cynicism and pessimism and skepticism are not the only ways to address the adversarial circumstances of life. And a big part of what needs to happen within the holiday, whether you do it as Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or some other holiday, is remembering the values that keep us going. A quote that came to mind earlier today was when I was thinking of Anne Frank, as she wrote in the Diary of Anne Frank, that when she was in the concentration camps, and she said every time somebody would hit her and she didn't die, she took that as an accomplishment, that in striking her, it was as if they were trying to devalue her and erase her voice and her being from existence, and they failed. And even though her body eventually did die, we still have the Diary of Anne Frank, and it has been shared and performed and read over and over and over again and studied in so many different ways. Did Anne Frank really die? Well, I guess physically she did, but her spirit and her voice and her insights and her perspective, to some limited degree, are still with us. That, to me, is a big part of what my life and everyone else's life can be about. That what we do with our moments is not just about making things more comfortable or convenient or luxurious. You know, to me, the people who suffer, the people who go hungry, the people who are homeless, are not just an intellectual construct. They're not just a headline in a newspaper. They're names and faces. They're, you know, the woman who was unable to leave her house when I was a young teenager, and I delivered newspapers. And whenever she came to the door, I took time to have a conversation with her, and I gave everyone on my route Christmas cards, even though I was only 14. It seemed like, you know, these were people who may not have anyone, or even if they did, they needed to know that they were valued and loved and noticed, and that they weren't just a category over there. That person who, they had a name, they had a story, they were a real person. And showing them respect and love and valuing them enough to smile at them and shake their hand and to recognize them as a real person and the impact that it made upon them and the difference it made in their lives, and how it was not just this endless stretch of struggle. I mean, from a purely logistical perspective, most of my daily life is an endless struggle dealing with overwhelming circumstances and too much information coming in. My autistic experience means that everything I see, everything I smell, everything I hear, it's all information that has to be processed. And when there's too much information coming in, it becomes overwhelming and exhausting. And so when I come home in the evenings, my whole apartment at the moment is pretty much lit only by night lights. And it's enough that I can walk around without stumbling into things. And I have a lamp over my desk so I can see when I'm working on something. The light is right there, but nowhere else. But by having the lower light level, it's less information for my brain to process, and it's not as exhausting being in a subdued lighting, being in subdued lighting in a dimly lit apartment. For me, there's something peaceful about it because I don't have to work as hard. There are so many different ways that each of us experience life. And what I'm always arguing for, I guess, in every opportunity I get, is first of all to be inclusive of everyone, that it's a person with a name and a story. And if you don't know their story, you probably won't understand the words they use or why they respond the way they do. It's a little bit sad to me when somebody is unwilling to share their story, because it's like I'm being shut out of their life. And I would love to be part of their life. I would love to be an encourager to them. I would love to be a support to them. I would love to be, in some sense, family to them. But that's a very different way of thinking than what most of society is currently practicing. You know, that everything is so corporate mandated and profit driven, and it's like we're losing our humanity. And in the celebration of Christmas, it's above all else, to me, it's a time to reclaim your own individual, unique humanity. Whether you're a person with a disability, whatever age you are, whatever race, whatever nationality, whatever religion. We live within a time of economic obsession, and unfortunately this bleeds into Christmas as well. And I think in many ways that robs us of the true treasure that Christmas can bring. That Christmas is not just about Christians, and it's not just about commercialism. That takes time for remembering what's important, remembering one's own values, and taking a hard look at whether the way I am living life is truly in sync with my own values. And if it's not, what can I do to move it there? And if I value people, have I told them? Have I done anything that demonstrates what I that demonstrates who I love and how I love and that I love. The turning of the year is about remembering the communal love that was so essential during prehistoric times, where people had to huddle together, come together, work together in order to survive the winters, in order to be warm enough and to be fed enough and nurtured in every other way enough that winter didn't become a time for going crazy because of being locked in solitary confinement. But the more adversarial the climate becomes, the more the best resource we have is each other. And the more we neglect that resource, the more Christmas becomes an empty, hollow point on the calendar that has no more substance than the numbers in the accounting books. Love is not just about giving, but love is about utilizing what you have received and using it in a way that keeps the cycle going, that it becomes what's called a symbiotic relationship, symbiosis, where each thing produces something the other needs that the other cannot produce for itself. The most basic, obvious example, I suppose, is that plants exhale oxygen and people exhale carbon dioxide. Well, the plants need the carbon dioxide, but they can't produce it. And people need the oxygen, but we can't produce it. It comes from the plants and the trees, and that's where our atmosphere comes from. Those sorts of relationships also exist within communities. That as a community renews itself by nurturing its individuals, no matter how eccentric they may be. What does anyone have that they didn't receive? And someone will say, well, I worked my way up and I earned this. And yeah, you invested something, but somewhere along the line, someone gave you the instruction, someone gave you the materials. There really is no such thing as a self-made person, because it's all dependent upon somebody else's contribution, somebody else's willingness to do a job or provide a material, or when you apply for a job, picking you over all the other people who applied. But at the same time, it's not about competition, it's about recognizing that there is an individuality to the experience of life, but it's also about trying to make sure that every individual has whatever he or she needs to make things work in their life. And that as we take care of each other, we find that everyone else is also taking care of us. And goodness, life is so interconnected. There's so many different thoughts racing through my head with each different thing I say. But going back to this notion of the turning of the year, the winter solstice, Christmas, Hanukkah, all these different things refer to Kwanzaa, refers to communities coming together during challenging experiences and challenging times of the year. And by working together, making it something beautiful, something wonderful, something inspiring and empowering. That the last person you expected to be a significant contributor to your life suddenly is. And the last person you expected to send you a Christmas card suddenly did. And in that gesture of kindness and love, to see if one can show what kind of person you are and respond in love also, which I suppose brings up the problematic fact or realization, I guess, that there are people in the world who are not loving, who are broken and lost and wounded and hurt and sad and selfish people. And is it enough to feel sorry for them? Well, that's one response, I suppose. I would hope that there are better responses beyond that also. The example that comes to mind a number of years ago, when I was in a committed relationship for 9 years with a man, and we had formed our own little two-person family and then added some dogs to that configuration. And I thought that since we, at least for a few years, had a stable sense of home together, that the appropriate thing to do at the holidays was to send a cordial greeting to all the different relatives in my family, and And so I thought that should at least include the direct members of my family and the next level, which would be cousins, aunts, and uncles. Well, unfortunately, for better or for worse, one of my cousins had married a woman from an extremely conservative faction of Christianity, and all the greeting card said was "Happy Holidays." I mean, it really didn't make any judgment one way or the other on anybody's belief system. And I was totally floored that I received this greeting card back 2 weeks later, unopened, with angry Bible verses written over every square inch of white space on the outside of the envelope. And I had to wonder I mean, I can understand, and I didn't try to persuade them of anything, that being from an extremely conservative Christian perspective, or so-called Christian perspective, I guess, that they would not approve of the existence of gay and lesbian people. They have a right to their opinion, but gay and lesbian people are not going to cease to exist simply because somebody doesn't approve of them, any more than any other group is going to cease to exist simply because someone doesn't approve. The world is filled with so many diverse people, with so many diverse experiences, and so many diverse opinions and perspectives and religious beliefs. Not approving of them doesn't make them cease to exist. And so, in some way, we all have to come to terms with the fact that the world is a diverse place, and it includes some people that I wouldn't approve of. And I need to find a way to love that person in spite of whatever hatred or brokenness or narrow-mindedness they might possess. Because it's not about being a reflection of that hostile response. It's not about being the embodiment of all those angry Bible verses and oh my God, how could she do that, and how outrageous, and whatever. It was about being the one who extended love. And if she didn't want to respond in love, well, then I guess she told me what kind of person she was. But I didn't have to be a reflection of her. I needed to be an expression of who I am, and what life means to me, and what is important to me, and how I believe in loving your enemies. And someone asked me once whether I was still a Christian because of the way I describe myself as an eclectic mystic, that my beliefs now include elements of neo-paganism and Christianity and New Ageism and a whole lot of other things as well, Buddhism, Hinduism. It's just kind of all in there somehow, because as an eclectic mystic, I conceive of the divine as the embodiment of highest wisdom and greatest love. And beyond that, I think God is beyond human comprehension. And so we're all learning and growing. And I'm not here to persuade anybody of my beliefs, and I'm not interested in being persuaded to anyone else's beliefs. But I do consider myself a Christian yet, in the sense of one who aspires to be genuinely Christ-like. And goodness knows there are times when I totally lose it, or some frustration comes up and I just snap and I'm not behaving like the person that I want to be, like the person that I believe more often I am. We all have our buttons, I guess some people say, the idea of having your buttons pushed, meaning where someone is so nice and so wonderful, and you mentioned this one topic, and oh boy, they cannot tolerate that. I met a wonderful couple once who were so complimentary until they found that I didn't embrace the so-called law of attraction, because the way it's presented I find to be very skewed, and and not something that I could support. Within virtually every belief system humanity's ever created, there is some basic sense of sowing and reaping, of garbage in, garbage out, of what you give is what you get. But even when you don't get back what would be appropriate to what you have given, I mean, people have told me that if you are nice to everybody, everybody will be nice to you. And I know from experience that is not true. And there are a lot of people I've helped over the years who, when I needed help, weren't there and weren't available. And if it wasn't convenient for them, they couldn't be bothered to help me. And I had to remind myself in those moments that it wasn't about what I gave them. It's like a Christmas present. It's a gift. It's not a loan. I didn't give it to you because I want to get something back. But if I give you something every single year and you never give me anything, that's going to teach me about the kind of relationship I can expect with you. And I will have to decide whether I have the strength to always, always, always be the giver, or whether what I really need is a symbiotic relationship. But the difference between a symbiotic relationship and this notion of keeping score or of keeping track. I gave you something, so now you have to give me something. No. I breathe, I exhale carbon dioxide freely. I trust it's enough for the houseplants that I keep within my apartment, but I really am not keeping track of whether I need to go exhale on them more, or, it seems to be that there's enough carbon dioxide and oxygen around that they're doing fine and I'm doing fine. I don't keep score. I give freely. When it comes to Christmas time, I want to give freely also. When someone says, "You didn't give me a gift," I sometimes say, "Well, I haven't heard from you enough this year to even know what you need, or to know what would make you happy, or to know what your interests are." If we're going to be part of each other's life and we get to Christmas time and I know that you are totally fascinated with quilts and quilting, then I'm going to be looking for things that have to do with quilts and quilting, because I know that's what you like, because we've talked enough and we've interacted enough for me to know that. If we haven't done the living the other 364 days out of the year, if we haven't shared that living, I don't know that we owe each other a present. And if I haven't been there for my house plants, watering them and cleaning away dead leaves and keeping the bugs away and so forth throughout the whole year, then I don't know that there's really any connection between us. I mean, and they may wind up dying from neglect, or I may wind up not receiving the mental and emotional benefits that I get by taking care of my houseplants and noticing when they're thriving and feeling good about that, and noticing when they need something from me, when they're starting to wilt because, oops, I forgot to water, and I drop what I'm doing and I go get some water for them, because there is a sense in which our lives are very interconnected. I started the show with a song that I wrote where I was trying to come to terms with the more difficult side of Christmas, I guess. And so one of my favorite Christmas Christmas songs, was the one that Dolly Parton recorded, entitled "Hard Candy Christmas," and where it was a similar sort of thing of wrestling with the difficulties of life and how there's just no certainty and it's struggle. And in spite of all that, I'm going to show the world what kind of person I am. And I'm going to march forward into the adversity, and I'm going to make something good of it. Because that's my decision, that's my chosen response. I'm not going to be just a reaction to everything that didn't go right this past year, I'm going to be the response of deciding what I want to see in the next year. And I'm going to respond by expressing the love that perhaps I wish I'd received from everyone else, but whether I receive it from everyone else or not, I'm going to go on expressing love because I want to be a person who is known for expressing love. I want to be a person who is known for love. It's that it reminds me of that wonderful song written by a minister named Fred Small. I believe it's entitled "Everything Possible," and it comes down to the chorus, or to the end of the chorus, where it says, or the chorus says, "You can be anybody you want to be. You can love whomever you will. You can travel every country where your heart leads, and know that I will love you still. You can live by yourself. You can gather friends around. You can choose one special one. But the only measure of your words and deeds is the love you leave behind when you're done." And that's really what it comes down to. And in that sense, Christmas, in the broader sense, not the restrictive Christian sense, Christmas is about communal love and about being together and coming together in that time, and with our arguments, with our agreements, at the end of it all to still say, even if we disagree, I still believe in you being alive, I still believe in you being here, and I'm willing to support that in whatever ways I can. And because we don't have to be the same and we don't have to agree, it takes all kinds to make the world work. And that's kind of what we come back to. But expressing who and what we are, one of my favorite Christmas carols, and I even decided to research it a bit, and I found it so amazing when I found out the real story. Let's start with the song. It's called "Good King Wenceslas." Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, where the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor one came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, and stand by me, if thou know'st it telling, yonder peasant who it be, where and what the dwelling. Sire, it is a good league hence, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes' fountain. Bring me bread and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, thou and I will see them dine, when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament, and the bitter weather. Sire, the night is darker now, and the wind grows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. Mark my footsteps, my good page, tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. In master's steps the page then trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod that the saint had printed. Therefore every one be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now would bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. It's always been one of my favorites, and so at one point I finally did some research, and I wanted to know who was good King Wenceslas, and where and when did he live, and and I don't remember all the details precisely, so please don't quote me on any of this, but I think I'm remembering somewhat in the ballpark. I think it was in an area of Europe where the Czech Republic is now, or somewhere close to there, and it was somewhere, I believe, in the early Middle Ages, and Wenceslas was indeed a king, but he was only a king for 2 years. He became king when he was only 20 years old, a very young man, and he died 2 years later when he was only 22 because his brother killed him in order to steal the throne. And so, and which to me, I protest. I said, no, this is wrong. How on earth could this be? That someone so good and so loving and so kind and so concerned for the poor was only, didn't somebody protect him or believe in him or something? And I guess I would say, if the proof is in the pudding, I don't remember his brother's name. But what, 800 years later, we're still singing about Wenceslas. And so who really won? It was a short but wonderful life for him, but a life that is still remembered because of the kindness and the love that he demonstrated. It is unlikely, perhaps, that there ever was a historical event exactly as described in the song, but there was enough benevolence and kindness and love and goodness to Wenceslas that somebody would compose a song like that in memory of him. That some 800 years later or whatever it is, we're still singing the name Wenceslas, even though nobody remembers who the brother was who killed him in order to become king. And I have to scratch my head sometimes, even at Christmas time, as I wonder. We talk about God's love and and Christmas being peace on earth, goodwill to men, and I think we're still trying to accomplish that. But the love of God is, I think, at least beyond human comprehension. On one hand, I will argue for its existence, but on the other hand, I will argue that we don't really understand it, because the love of God, I think, must depend upon the perspective of God. That only by looking at the whole scope of time and understanding the life that King Wenceslas got to live to only 22, that it was so characterized by love that we would be remembering him and singing his songs hundreds of years later, and to allow it to be that way, because if God had rewarded Wenceslas with protection and long life and all kinds of other things that we would deem absolutely appropriate to one who was so exemplary, then he wouldn't have been killed. And would we still even have the song, or would we just say that, oh, he was a good king and that was it? By allowing this tragic circumstance, it moved him into a different category, so that he is an inspiration and a song so many hundreds of years later. In reading the Bible stories, considering all these noteworthy people in the stories that God loved so much, and consider my servant Job, there is none like him. And God's love for Job allowed all that suffering and loss to happen throughout the book of Job, as it's talking about death of children and sores on his body and losing everything and sitting outside the city in a pile of ashes. And then it says that God restored all his fortunes, and he had wealth and family and house and everything that he lost. That didn't change the fact that he had sons and daughters who had died previously, and that maybe on a particular day of each week, Job would go to the cemetery and place flowers on their graves, not forgetting that they were real people, that they weren't just the category of the sons and daughters he lost. They were individual names with individual preferences and hair color and everything. Maybe some of them played musical instruments, all sorts of different things. They were very unique individuals to Job. He was their father. And the story of Joseph being sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt and serving in Potiphar's house and being thrown into prison for 2 years before Pharaoh had a dream one night. The love of God did not prevent Joseph from spending 2 years in prison. And the love of God did not prevent Job from suffering greatly, extremely. And it leaves any serious person of faith questioning what makes the love of God so wonderful. I think as an eclectic mystic though, I think it's more important that we wrestle with the questions than that we insist upon dogmatic answers, or that we come up with easy answers that will allow us to put closure on the story and close the book, and that's resolved, we don't have to think about it. No, in some ways, the love of God allowing for those sorts of struggles and suffering is exactly what we need to remember throughout our lives. And Christmas and the turning of the year coming during the coldest and darkest time of the year is what we need to remember all the rest of the year. That this heightened awareness that is easy to forget when you're running through a field in the middle of summer, or busy planting the garden in spring, or raking the leaves in fall, that this coldness and darkness and this remembrance and this focus and this looking hard in the mirror and saying, who am I? And if I don't learn something from this darkness and coldness, am I going to be a totally ungrateful wretch the rest of the year? Do I take things for granted? Do I not appreciate that what I am enjoying costs somebody something? Part of the face paint of the ritual garb of being Sister Who that I continue to employ are the pink triangles on each cheek. And the simple understanding, I guess, is that the pink triangle came from the Nazi concentration camps of World War II, in which gay men were identified by a pink triangle before they were exterminated, before they were killed for nothing more than being gay. But I keep that as part of my ritual garb. I keep those, and every time I make an appearance as Sister Who, it takes 3 hours of preparation to put all this on, and I put the pink triangles on my cheeks, and I remember the men who died for loving other men, for being who they were, and not lying about it, for living in integrity, for living in genuine love, but a love that even yet the world doesn't completely understand. And I think if we ever forget that men have died to create the recognition of the pink triangle, that someone's sacrifice was required, at that point, being gay or being able to be out, being able to walk down the street and hold hands with someone you love who is of the same gender, if we forget the price that has been paid, it will become a glib and meaningless thing, and it won't be respected for the accomplishment that it is. So we need to remember in coming to Christmas that loving each other is because of the price that was paid for us to be who we are, where we are, to have gotten as far as we do, to have hope in the middle of winter because of the people who believe in us enough to keep us going. some people who have died so that we could have the freedom and the resources that we do. And not to take that lightly, and not to dismiss it, and not to think that it's no big deal. And part of that, to me, I guess, is seeing gay men who now, as more and more acceptance is achieved within large cities, that the supposition that the struggle is over, it's done, we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, so we just won't mention this anymore. And the more being gay and being out is not talked about, the more, in effect, they're reconstructing the closet. The more we don't take time to remember the sacrifices at Christmas time, the more it becomes a hurried experience of there's the tree, there's the presents, rip open the packages, see what it is, okay, thanks, okay, next thing, and on. And we take for granted the effort and the sacrifice and what it means that somebody chose to give something specifically to us, and how to appreciate that love and kindness by utilizing the gift in some constructive way. That it not become just a meaningless little thing of we're just going through the motions without thinking about what it means. But to recognize, even if we are going through the motions, to take the time to start thinking about why we're going through the motions and what does it mean, and how is it empowering our lives, and how do we relaunch ourselves into the new year with a renewed and valued and reaffirmed sense of purpose, that we bring to the springtime, the new year, the renewal of things. We bring a new renewed person who has depth and understanding and appreciation, who doesn't take things for granted and doesn't treat them lightly, who doesn't treat gifts disrespectfully because we understand what they cost. And to not take freedom lightly because we understand what it costs. To not take the freedom to love whom you love, to marry whomever you will. To not take that lightly or for granted because it costs somebody their very lives, and it costs decades and decades, and in some cases hundreds of years of struggle. Even the ability to come into a church with one you love who may be of the same gender, and to be able to kneel down and pray with the person you love, to weave your prayers together, to stand before a congregation and a minister and profess your vows publicly, and, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. When everybody is getting divorces because somebody lost their job and we're broke now, or something didn't work out, or I found somebody better, and I don't care that we have 20 years of memories of building our lives around each other. That all these things are accomplishments that were not easily done. And to pause for a moment at Christmas time, whether kneeling in a church or kneeling in a forest or whatever place you find sacred, looking through a telescope at the stars in the heavens and feeling a sense of awe, and finding in that sense of awe a sort of sacredness that causes humility and that causes remembrance, and that brings depth to one's soul and depth to one's appreciation. That it is not a light and easy thing. As we're approaching the end of our time, there's one more reminiscence from a book I read that I'd like to share, because it's a book I recommend to absolutely everyone. It's entitled Walking on Water. It was written by an author named Madeleine L'Engle, who is most known for her children's book, A Wrinkle in Time, but she also wrote this other book, Walking on Water, subtitled Reflections on Faith and Art. And in there she talks about being a grandmother and putting her granddaughters to bed in the evening, and one evening a granddaughter turning to her with this absolutely profound but innocent childlike question. Innocent question of childhood, I guess. Is it all right? And at first she just said, well, yes, of course it's all right. And she said, no, really, Grandma, is it really all right? And she said, and she goes into this reflection where she had to think of this granddaughter's predecessors, her great-great-grandparents and grandparents, and the problems that they endured, and fleeing from burning houses, and going through war times, and all the struggles that her ancestors went through, and all of that coming down to the existence of this beautiful granddaughter in front of her. And in that broader, deeper understanding, she says, having feet planted on the rock, being able to say, yes, it is all right. All of that suffering and struggle happened so that you could be here, so that you could live and you could explore the capabilities of your life. Explore your ability to give, your ability to love, your ability to bring peace into the world. Mutual respect, even between arguing relatives at Christmas time. To say that even with our arguments, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that our lives have overlapped. I'm glad we have the opportunity to give to one another and to be together during this dark and cold time. And in this dark and cold time, to find a renewed sense of unconditional love. And now may you be blessed with love and peace in the pursuit of your own dreams and in all your dealings with the diversity of humanity around you. Amen.
I shall find in Christmas a day to live in love, to be aware of what's around me, within and up above. A day to let the old be gone and look for the new to come. I shall find in Christmas a day to live in love.